What's up, guys? Welcome back to Dudes with Feelings. My name is Fletch, and this is episode 4. This is our first episode that we are inviting a guest in. His name is Ed Williams. He has been an educator. He was a youth director for a while and now is a life coach and works a lot with kids and mental health. Ed has impacted all of us through the work that he's done and just the person that he is. He recently gave an incredible talk on belonging. And in this conversation, we're going to hear from him about how we're all craving this sense of belonging, especially as men.
I like when the curls are flowing, I have to let the curls flow. But you may notice that Ed just got a big haircut. Yeah, Fletch noticed.
Big notice. Ed, where'd it go?
Yeah, Jenny chopped it off. It's been about almost 4 years with the long locks. I had the Henry locks. It was just time. It's time to get rid of it. And it's funny, while she was cutting, I'm like, more here, more here. She's like, you are guiding me into cutting a mullet. And I said,
I've been told that too.
But she wasn't for it. So this is where we ended up.
I think that's part of, with all the work that you do in high school, you just want to belong with the high school kid.
I do. It's just this natural gravity.
Yeah.
Well, the long hair can be distracting sometimes just because Ed's such a beautiful man,
Yeah, that's what it is. Beauty.
Man, Ed, thanks so much for being on. Taking the time.
Excited to be on.
It's I get to spend a lot of time with you, and so every time is awesome. But to bring the whole crew together is especially special. I feel like the first time me, you, and Fletch talked was on Zoom. So there's something almost sentimental about this virtual convening.
Yeah, it does like harken back. I think you were in a van, like somewhere you pulled off the side of the road, Fletch, and allowed us to like connect that very first time. Was it like 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago?
Yeah, I was in Oregon, in a parking lot in Oregon.
I was about to say, it's not Nan in the van time period, right? Because that harkened way after.
Yes. No, this was Pacific Northwest, and I was searching everywhere just for a couple bars of signal because we had a meeting about what we were going to be talking about. And lo and behold, this parking lot had 2.5 bars, and I think we connected on multiple levels, but it was, I think, your enthusiasm and the way in which you were so curious about life that I think attracted me to you, Ed. So that was something so cool that even in virtual spaces, right, something that has become a lot more normal, you can still gauge and get an understanding for a person based on like the vibration of their voice and the inflection points around what they get excited about.
Well, that's kind of you to say. Obviously, I felt the same about you guys. I like floated out of that meeting. I was so pumped after talking to you guys.
We're still floating, and I think that's a good segue. Ed, do you want to take us back? I mean, that kind of was the start of so much of what you do now that I'm very blessed to be a small part of. But will you tell us a little bit more about what you do and what you're spending your energy on right now?
Yeah, man. So I've been working with students and their families for like 25 years. I went to school to be a teacher. So a degree in education, was a middle school teacher, volleyball coach for about 12 years. Came out of that work because I was invited to come on staff at a church of all places. Never, ever dreamt that I would work for a church, but was asked to come. I was already volunteering, my wife and I, in a student ministry at a non-denominational church. And they just asked if I would leave teaching, which I never thought I would do, and come and lead this group of volunteers and these students. And so I ended up working with them for about 8 years. And during that, made a lot of amazing relationships. And one of those relationships, really close with a family and their 3 sons. And then in 2017, It's heavy but real. Their oldest son had gotten into Chapel Hill, had graduated from a Charlotte area school, knew this kid really well. He was not only one of my students, but one of my small group leaders. He also led a group of middle school boys. And he actually took his life the freshman fall at UNC Chapel Hill. And so to mourn that loss of not only Tyler, but also to mourn with his family and so many people that knew him was just like obviously devastating. And so when I met you guys, it was because his mom had done a lot of work traveling the country, trying to find a way in which she could make sure no other family had to experience what she and her family did. And had been given 2 days at a local high school, the high school that her son graduated from, and just said, hey, we know that this is very important to you. You're doing a lot of work around mental health and trying to equip students. If we gave you 2 days, would you want them? And she said, yes. And she admits to this day, she had no idea what we were going to do during those 2 days. But she reached out to me and my friend Chaz. And so we started designing what these 2 days would look like. And you guys had just done an event at the same high school, I think maybe a few months before or earlier that school year, with a smaller group of students. And everyone had just raved about how amazing, you got to meet the Blue Marble guys. And so I was excited, had no idea. I went on, watched the film, was like, okay, I'm really excited, even more so to meet this group of guys now. And so Chaz and I think invited you guys, reached out via Zoom or something. And we all jumped on together, and it was infectious. Like, again, the curiosity, Fletch, that you're accusing me of, Henry, like I saw it in both of you. I was just so excited. How can we platform these two guys to share their story, to be transparent, so that these students can walk away better equipped maybe for that transition for whatever was coming after high school. And then it was actually at a later event where I got to meet you, McKenzie. We brought you guys in again the next year because of that event. We ended up back in the school doing 5 events instead of just a 2-day event at the end of the year. And it's kind of just grown since then. So I don't know. I hope that answers your question, Fletch. Or who was that, Henry, that said that? Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, and just to give you guys a little context, I just in the last 8 months have gotten more involved with this organization that Ed is referring to that kind of came out of this tragedy and has really become an organization that's doing some amazing work, and it's called For Students. And I'm curious, Ed, because I know you work a lot with students. Obviously, there's so many parallels in this mental, emotional health world. Students, non-students, like we all experience the same emotions. When Whitney, who started For Students, when she went around the country and you guys kind of came back and you put all this knowledge together, where did you arrive at? Like, where was the gap? What are schools currently not doing that made you guys feel like, okay, I think there's something we need to step into?
Having been a public educator for a long time and knowing what teachers are asked to do and the tasks, that schools are given to accomplish, and, this knowledge that they want students to acquire in this very short time, and then the testing and now the scores that these teachers are graded by, not only are students graded, but teacher performance is graded based on these test scores and the pressures that they all experience. Teachers, I think, in schools are doing they're frantically doing everything that they can. I just think it's so tough in this world where everything is demanding attention from us and very good at it. Like, and when I say demanding, that sounds like, hey, you've got to give me. I mean, we're happy to give our attention away. And so it's not just the students that we're seeing, obviously giving their attention away, but parents and all of these things that perhaps there was downtime, and there's just less and less downtime, and perhaps we are less and less equipped as families, perhaps, to give our own kids the types of tools that they might need to cope with particularly difficult times in life. We're just watching students graduate schools with this life where they've been in all the schools we're in. These kids are they're so successful academically and even athletically, like in these schools, like state titles. I mean, the gyms that we're in, right, Henry? I mean, these banners, they're just numerous. And the list of schools, if you go by their college counseling offices, the names on these plaques of these schools where these students are heading is impressive by every metric that we would as a culture, measure these graduates. But the thing that just seems to be more and more the case is like students are just shocked when they run up against difficulty in life. They don't seem to quite know how to respond, or that the response that they feel is overwhelming and they're not quite sure where to turn. This isn't how they expected their story to go. And they've never been given perhaps the pre-management skills or tools, or just even the knowledge. Hey, you're going to run into this. This is going to be harder than you expect. The story is going to take left and right turns when you don't expect those things to happen. And you can do it. You can handle it. And this is how you handle it. And this is how you handle it in a healthy way. And and so I think that is the place where we find ourselves, is not just providing a curriculum, but showing up and hopefully creating events that are full of like mindset tools and actionable steps, but also done in a way that's engaging, that students actually want to pay attention for maybe the 20, 25 minutes while we're actually just talking to them or inviting them into some content. That's the way it seems. At least I think that's what I'm seeing and feeling and what I hope we're doing.
Ed, and after watching your video, the one on belonging, I think you did such a
Oh, you saw that, dude?
Yeah.
I had to send it to him, man. It was so good. And just
so
for context,
good.
Ed recently gave an amazing talk, guys, at a couple schools actually, and hopefully at some point that'll go public because it really is so powerful. But Ed, Fletch, keep commenting.
Well, I felt like I was watching a TED Talk, number one, and I feel like
Ed Talk.
one thing you did, you said Ed Talk.
That's what the students call it. The Ed Talks. Cross out the T.
But really, you should send that into TED, because that is a. I guess you have to get it shorten it down just a little bit to the 13 minutes. Anyway, what I think you did such a fabulous job doing is you started with story, and you started with your story, and you went super personal. And I think that level of vulnerability, you're not talking about vulnerability, you're being vulnerable up there on stage with them. And I think no matter who we are, as humans, we're drawn to story. And I think that's what Henry and McKenzie and I, we have such this common bond and a common thread of wanting to tell stories. And that's what I think draws us to film. But after watching that, I'm like, that's what's engaging is the storytelling element, and something I really enjoyed in that whole video.
Thanks, man. That's super cool of you to say. I think anytime I'm communicating, it's the first thing that I think is, what is something that I've experienced that I think many people, if they haven't experienced that exactly, it would be compelling enough so they find themselves within the content. That I'm not coming with something, even if it's perhaps novel content, and I'm hoping that it's new and it's something that maybe they've never considered before. There's some point at which the content and their story, converge. And if we can start, right, like any type of transfer of knowledge, if we can start at a place where those two things come together, I think it's just so much easier to listen to and walk away with something that's helpful, I think, and engage with, right? So that's cool of you to say, man. Thank you, Fletch.
You know, Ed, I watched the talk too, and it was like really, really cool. Loved it. And I'm curious for you to kind of expand a little bit more on what are kids missing that they weren't missing 20, 30 years ago? What's changed now that's caused so many students, so many young people in today's generation coming up through school feeling lost or abandoned or forgotten or ill-equipped to handle their future?
McKenzie, man, I wish I knew the exact, the answer. Like, that's the question, right? Is like, what is so different right now? And I think obviously everyone immediately, certainly any older generations, are like, social media, it's the ruination of humankind, or whatever. I don't know why those people are from the South specifically, but it's like, I don't know. I just think when I was a kid, boredom was it was something everyone experienced. Like, boredom would just be something that you just had to deal with again and again. And I think there's an aspect at which we don't, what is boredom? Like we don't ever have to experience a moment where we are, not engaged in some way or another. Because the moment I don't like consciously do it, I reflexively reach for a device, or I can reach or find something that can captivate my attention. So I think there's got to be some tie-in in that way, where we're less and less comfortable maybe with ourselves, because we've had very little time to just sit and process maybe who we are, or what we think, or certainly what we feel. I can, there's at any given moment, I can reach for something and cope in a way where I can numb or I can mask, and I don't have to necessarily deal with those thoughts or feelings that boredom maybe caused us to deal with. But as a quick aside, I mean, my friends and I, we'd always invent a game. It's not like I would just sit there and be like, okay, guys, let's just sit quietly. We would just figure out some game where, dude, you have a tennis ball in your car? Go grab that. And we would just figure out something to do while we waited for somebody to show up somewhere. But I don't know, perhaps there's something to do with our attention, and we don't ever have any downtime to contemplate. There's very little silence, and certainly very little solitude, perhaps today. I think, and this is just another thing too, and I don't have any science to support this necessarily, but it's just an observation that I ask students this often now: what are they looking forward to? Like, what has a student not already experienced by the time they're in 10th and 11th grade, particularly in affluent communities, where, I didn't experience until I was perhaps much later. And I don't know that that's necessarily income or whatever. It's just as much as, wow, I can give my kid this experience now. Like, why wouldn't I want to watch the delight in my student's face as I rent them a limousine for the sixth grade dance? Like, or I'm just curious if there's something about that where we have the ability to provide so much for our kids, and I'm not shaming that in any way, because we understand why we would do it. But I'm just wondering, this feeding this thing in us for the easiest thing, the most delightful thing, the next biggest thing. Is that doing something to our ability to withstand these storms that come? When things aren't confetti moments, you know what I'm saying? When it's just, it's hard, or it's boring. It's something that's like, man, I don't like the way this feels. I don't know. Those are just a couple of things that come to mind. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Henry, you and I talk about this all the time. What are you guys seeing in that world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because it's not like the desires or like what we're longing for has changed. Just
Right.
that places we can go for that. And Ed does a great job in his talk, kind of boiling it down to the fact of so much of what we do is motivated by this desire to belong, to fit in. And it's got me thinking in my own life, just an important awareness. But it feels like there's this almost tool for belonging now when it comes to the cell phone that gives us this, like, that feeling, that sense of belonging. But it's almost real, but it's just not quite real. And so it's this fleeting sense of like, I want to keep going back for it. I want to, because I feel kind of like I belong, but then when I shut it down, I realize I still am, it's still not there. Like, I'm not actually filled in that. And that feels like my experience a lot of times on social media. Yet I'm still, I love the example they give in The Social Dilemma, that it's hard to say that a cell phone is just a tool. It matters how you use it, because a bike is a tool. Ed and I took a bike ride yesterday. The bikes were just sitting in the garage waiting for us. A cell phone is coercing you constantly to come back to it. It's designed for you to use it. And it's not like the bike just sitting there. And so, I mean, there's something there, but it's so misunderstood. And I think I'm with you, Ed. It's hard to know, like, put a real finger on the pulse of what exactly it is. But I mean, I'm thinking about it, especially since watching your talk, just in the sense of recognizing, like, we're still seeking the same things we have been for generations. It's just how has maybe the way that we're seeking those things started to shape our ability to find it, or built other habits that now we're looking at like, whoa, what is the real impact on what we've created? And maybe we can press pause and really think about it.
Yeah, I agree with a lot with what you were saying, Ed, about how we've kind of had an abundance of comfort that people didn't have access to 30, 40 years ago. I will say that taking a little bit of a different spin on it, um, we all have this inner voice in our head, which really is, you know, that younger self, where that inner child per se, and that inner child and that inner voice, I think, gets validated now because it always runs to comfort and safety as much as possible. And when we can actually provide our inner voice that safety in every single minute of our lives, I think it provides, I think it makes that inner voice uh, more intense and more uh, clear than ever before, because we don't have as many people around us anymore who are challenging our thought processes or the things we believe in. We tend to just go to the corners of social media that agree with us. And so I think there's this big issue where um, people's inner voices have become their identity rather than just an element of their thought process. And the fact that everyone just runs to comfort and safety whenever they can create a really unhealthy complex with their inner voice.
It kind of reminds me of the event we just did, Ed.
Yeah.
We literally just had an event on thoughts, and Ed did a great job kind of hammering that point home, McKenzie. Like, we are not our thoughts. Like, if I was my thoughts, I would not want people to know me. It would be almost next to impossible to love myself, right? Like, we all have some thoughts that we don't even know where they come from. It feels like they just flew in from Mars, and I'm like, wow, where did that come? So I think
Yeah.
that is true. Is where are we finding identity? And it's really hard with social media to actually come to some capital T true identity that is actually benefiting or helping us in life versus just leading to more confusion and chaos internally.
Yeah, that inner voice, being that younger kid, uh, is essentially in men's group. What we talk a lot about is how do you talk to your younger self, and try to cope with the things that you didn't get in your childhood that your inner voice is trying to run to. And a lot of guys, work on that by actually like addressing their younger self in an invisible chair and kind of talking to their younger self and giving them a nurturing, kind of compassionate tone, rather than seeing their inner voice as this negative, horrible thing that's controlling their life and leading them to shame. Like, having compassion and a nurturing approach to your inner voice and treating it like a younger child, the way like a normal guy would treat, their son. And I think that's a really interesting thing that you guys were talking about thoughts. I love that.
At one point, I loved the metaphor of, and I would use this a lot during visualization exercises, is laying in a field, very lush field, and looking up at the sky, and the thoughts are clouds, right? And as the clouds go by, you have the choice and the power to decide which thought you want to actually stop and entertain. Otherwise, you learn to allow the thought to go by. And that's an exercise. I think it's a practice. And I think instead of practicing that, and instead of practicing the ability to let thoughts pass, I think what we see happening and what you guys are talking about is this giant cyclical cycle where we're continually latching on to every single thought because it is a false sense of security. And I kind of want to go back just a little bit and give you some space to really talk about this idea of belonging and um, like, where does it come from inside of us? Like, where does this idea of belonging come from, and how are we finding it right now?
But I think, I don't know, evolutionarily speaking, I mean, it seems that like this idea of being in a space where we are obviously social animals, we're obviously very uncomfortable, and it's apparently unbelievably unhealthy when we are not connected. And you can see what isolation has, personal experience. You can think to times where you felt isolated and what it did to you and your own human experience. But what we see people do, just even oftentimes, sadly, in the news, when people are isolated or they've been ostracized and removed from a group and they feel that they don't belong, what happens to individuals. But I don't know, something about like it just seems to be imprinted that it's of the utmost importance that we find our group or at least have a group and we don't jeopardize our space within that group. And I think if we begin to really think about who, like when we're making decisions, and one of the things I talk about, when I at these schools, when I gave the belonging talk, was around haircuts. We were talking about haircuts at at the beginning of the recording, shoes, our own performance in athletic endeavors, our own performance in, whether it's in theater or music or I don't know, just all of these places. If we're really to track that, those feelings back to, like, follow that rope back to where it's anchored, a lot of it, at least personally in my experience, seems to be anchored to fear of people in my group disapproving perhaps of my choices or of my performance, and that, wow, I really wanted to play well, and since I didn't, it feels shameful because of what these eyes and these voices outside would say of that performance. And so I think, gosh, if we're willing, I've heard people talk about, you guys have perhaps talked about it before, but like the 7 whys, like asking again, just deeper and deeper, why? And I just think so much of what we're doing, whether it's even, gosh, think about this, like even down to the automobile we drive or the job title that we have, the neighborhoods we live in, what we're motivated by. I mean, in filmmaking, I mean, think about it, like where your film stacks against other films. And, it's just a constant thing of where do I measure up? And perhaps if I could create a film that, swept South by Southwest, and just people were just raving about it, and it just kind of blew up all over the country, I would be validated. I would be able to put something on that would cover who I am, maybe, or make me enough so that whatever circle I walked in, I would belong. I would feel that I was supposed to be there, and people would look at me with eyes of acceptance and approval. And again, man, this is just me, just what little I know and what little I've experienced, kind of just guessing as to what the whole belonging thing is attached to.
I think
Yeah.
in that little, though, there's a lot. So don't belittle
I
your work.
appreciate that.
I mean, you're reading my mail over here. We just got denied from a couple film festivals for Beyond the Beat.
Man.
I'm sitting over here this morning like, maybe one day we'll be good enough.
Yeah.
Well, it speaks to that whole culture that's been designed about delayed gratification, right? Once I go to a good college, I'll be set. Once after college, I'll get a good job, I'll be set. Once I'm able to financially provide, I'll be set. But really all it does is just lead you to this endless road of nothing where, you've reached the end of it and you're like, wait, I didn't even stop and smell the roses, So I think that's super, super important. Going back, Ed, a little bit, you spoke slightly on isolation and that increased feeling of isolation. I think it's no surprise that especially the upcoming generation is really battling this sense of loneliness and isolation. And there was a recent study that came out saying that if someone feels lonely, it's equivalent to like smoking 15 cigarettes a day to your actual physical health. And so what kind of things are keeping these students from what you've seen in that state of loneliness and isolation? What kind of patterns have you seen at different schools?
I do see this pervasive thing with students. And Henry, it kind of goes back to one of the things that you mentioned earlier. And it seems to be the empty calories of connection, like the types of connections that we're making is almost like after you've been at a party all night and all you did was small talk, you never really like connected with somebody and you're like, oh man, we got past like what you do and like where you lived and grew up. And, we kind of got past all that and we started like said something and somebody was perhaps a little more vulnerable. And before you knew it, you're on that thrill ride of what it means to like open up and be real with somebody. And I think that the types of connections we're making is, with followership or viewers or whatever, and maybe even this like quick fix vulnerability with someone that is, like at gamer 1275 or whatever, and we are like we made this, oh no way, that's so real or whatever, and like, yeah, cool, but there's never, it doesn't go much beyond that. There's no consistency. It's just this fix perhaps of vulnerability, but certainly nothing over time. And I think, Fletch, you and I talked about this, man, like maybe last year or whatever, this idea that there is a thrill in being vulnerable with someone. And it is exhilarating, but that perhaps this idea of being in relationships long enough to experience not only that thrill, but then perhaps a little bit some of what the mundane means in a relationship as well, and what that does to relationships and connectedness over time. Someone brought me a song lyric or mentioned it recently at a coffee. I was hanging with a friend who was in town from Texas, and he mentioned this song lyric, and he just said, "You can't make old friends." And I was just like, there's something to this, these experiences over time that's different than these thrills of these experiences of being vulnerable, kind of like vulnerability, like bombing with people. That's really fun. But there's also something I think that happens over time. And I can't remember exactly what you asked me now. I kind of went on a rabbit trail of thought, but I don't know if that hits what you were talking about or not, Fledge.
No, I think the vulnerability bombing, I think, goes parallel with a little bit of the lifestyle I've been living for a little bit, which is like the nomadic lifestyle, which feels, extremely exhilarating and stimulated from an outside perspective, right?
Yeah.
New. And so that it creates this, this beautiful world that lives on the outside. And I think going back to a previous point you're making is like being able to sit still and being able to sit in a space of boredom. I think not just as a kid and not just as a boy, but as a man is extremely challenging. And when the challenge comes up, instead of saying, "Hey, I need to grab my device," sit there with the challenge, be with the challenge, and not let it overtake you and win. It's merely just an experience and a feeling. And it doesn't have to be something that, I guess, wins the battle in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where my brain was going as you were talking and going down that rabbit hole of vulnerability bombing. I've had to kind of bring that into my awareness because sometimes I want to go deep with people right away.
Yeah.
And people aren't willing to go there. So it's just like, put on the brakes. I'm willing to go there, but like I'm learning right now that that's not the purpose in every relationship, and sometimes you can be friendly and that is enough.
It's okay to talk about the weather here and there. And I think it is really a muscle that we practice. And it's fun hearing you talk about it, Ed, because I've learned a lot from you in this area, just watching you flow in relationships and even just how seamless it was to connect with you. I feel like you lead with this. You're so willing to get vulnerable. Sometimes I wonder what the difference between openness and vulnerability is. But I often think about vulnerability being sharing the things that may be a little bit uncomfortable to share. But maybe as we do that, it gets more and more comfortable to share. So we're able to go further and further. I'm curious for you, especially as a man, as a dude with feelings, if you will, like how do you do that? Like, it sounds weird, but how do you actually step into more vulnerable conversations? How do you work towards deeper relationships in your life? And maybe some people out there can glean some things.
I don't know that I have, any answer that would be any better than anyone else's answers, but I think the journey I've been on, and now I'm just old. I'm so much older than you guys. Like, I just celebrated my 50th birthday. And so I've been living in this world of imperfection, for a really long time, and coming to grips with my imperfection just over and over and over again, and practicing just personally this ability to, say like, yeah, Ed, you kind of fucked up right there. However, like, you know why, and you trace back why I failed, and allowing, I don't know, just that you mentioned the child earlier, McKenzie, like allowing and speaking to myself, like allow myself to make mistakes and speaking to myself with compassion in those moments. And this is a quick aside, but this is just something that I'm discovering even as I'm talking to you right now, as I'm thinking about this imagery that comes to mind when I make a mistake and I allow myself to be human and have made a mistake, is I think about professional golfers. I don't know why this comes to mind, but I think about the number of repetitions that they have to go through to get to the place where they are. And yet when the cameras are on and it's Sunday and, and it's like, it's coming down to like that gap in strokes. I mean, these people they're just making mistakes like over and over again. Like it's just, imperfection is just part of what it means to be us. And so if they're doing that with those kind of reps, like I can allow myself to make a mistake in an area, perhaps in something that I'm not a master at and would never claim to be masterful in. And so I think there's some element that it begins perhaps there. Again, this is me just kind of feeling this out. I think that a lot of it begins in our ability to allow ourselves to be imperfect and understanding that there's no one, that exists without imperfection. And then out of that, I've just found that, wow, the moment that you're willing to share something that has happened to you where your imperfections have been exposed. And I've also find that like, there's so much overlap. I just assume that a lot of human beings are experiencing some of the things that I'm experiencing. So perhaps there's an optimism or there's some element in me that's naive, but I also assume that everyone has I bet you've maybe probably experienced this basically on the way we're interacting. Maybe this is something you've experienced, but this happened. And I was just like, I felt like such an idiot, and I just find it to be a place where in divulging some of those imperfections, I find a meeting place with other people, a chance to develop greater intimacy in those imperfections. It just seems to be where intimacy begins really to happen is fessing up. Yeah.
Well, and something I notice in that is even to get to that place, there has to be maybe you connect to this, maybe you don't, but it seems like there has to be some underlying feeling that this person is for me. Even in that sense of I'm sure they've experienced something similar. At least they're going to be able to connect and not judge me for feeling this way. This person must be for me at some underlying level, which is that sense of belonging, back to belonging.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
If I feel like I belong, then I'm willing to get vulnerable. And at a certain level, and we talked about this just in reference to your talk, that at some level, other people have to give you the space to feel that you belong. And then there comes the point where I have to make a choice and actually believe that I belong. Mm-hmm. And it feels like the more that I make the choice to belong and believe that I belong in this space, the more I can flow through the world and actually believe people are for me. And I can show up and be vulnerable. And the fruit of that is deeper relationships. It's deeper connection and actually even more and more belonging.
HD, I think I'd actually challenge that and say that that's your first step before getting to the space of being able to interact with other people and feel like a sense of belonging from other people. Is you first have to accept the fact that you deserve to feel belong. And I think a lot of people don't even get to that step, especially a lot of men today. I don't think get to that step. They're always so focused on trying to please other people that they don't actually stop and say, what do I really deserve in life? I deserve to feel belonging. I deserve to feel desired and believed in and all of these things. But a lot of men don't stop and have that conversation with themselves or have that compassion. I think so. I would say I'd reverse it almost and say that that's the starting point.
I think kind of building off the reverse, McKenzie, I think this is kind of a funny thought, but I feel like I can say it.
Go, man, go. Say it.
You guys are some good dudes.
It's
and
just
I feel
us,
like
man.
I belong in this space. But I think about the word. I love words. So I think about the word belong, right? You break it down to, and you put some space between be and long. We're longing to be, longing to just be as humans. And I think we get so caught up in the world of doing that we become the human doings instead of human beings. So if we can accept that we're all trying and just wanting to be, then I think it creates those safe spaces where belonging becomes a lot easier, and a lot of guards go down for people
I can dig that. I
longing to
like that,
be.
Fletch. Longing to be. And I think, I don't know, it's just interesting. And this has come with a lot of life, and it's come with also, I'm a parent. So I have 2 daughters, and I've been working with middle and high school students for all this time. There's some, I don't know at what point it was, but I remember hearing this, but it happened before this, but it was just a great lesson, is that I heard this parenting tip that spoke to, no matter what your kid is telling you, you don't show any surprise. Like the fact that you may be aghast at something they just shared that they and their friends did while they were hanging out, in the cookout parking lot or whatever it may be. You don't look surprised in any way. You just kind of like, oh yeah, like it's just any other day. And you just like, yeah, no way. It was on fire. Then what happened? And then you just allow them to just share. And you may be freaking out on the inside, but you just kind of just allow people to express without reaction. And they come to find that this is a safer place. And obviously you can, there's all types of other things that follow that. But why I say that is because I think one of the things that happened over these many years of life where I was a teacher and watched not just students, but other teachers and people just do, and parents do absolutely ridiculous things for years and years. Then being a student pastor where I watched students, and then I was invited into incredibly awkward and very, very just, I don't know, just horrible situations, and sat in like some crazy conversations between kids and their parents where I'm mediating or I'm giving, counsel. And now in this program, I'm not surprised by anything that a human being would have done or would fess up to having done, or a thought that they might have, they're like, I'm going to be really vulnerable with you and tell you about this crazy like thought that I had. It's just like, yeah, that sounds like something a human would do or think. And that you just get to this place where, yeah, that sounds about right. Like what you're sharing with me sounds about right. And to your point, Henry, like I think coming to that place where you're willing to be really honest with yourself about how crazy the thoughts are you have had, and some of the really, really stupid things that not only you've done, but man, like you're talking about, I wouldn't want people to see or know my thoughts. Like if we had screens above our head where people could see where the rabbit trails our brains go, we'd feel so disqualified. We wouldn't, but it's like, I know me, I know the crazy things I've done and thought. Yeah, that sounds about right, like for a person to do. And if you can get to that place, wow, imagine how you can create belonging for people. Because one of the key things that was a part of this talk, and it was one of the biggest revelations for me as I was preparing for it, because what I was actually asked to speak on was, how do we create, like, how can we tell students to be themselves? And it's like, Fletch, like, your brand, like, be cool, be you. It's like, how can, and it doesn't start there. Like I wish it started with just you being in a place where you could just be cool and be you. But in school, it really doesn't. In a lot of places, it doesn't. I think when we get older, we become more, perhaps, bold. We become bold enough where, and hopefully we have enough support where we feel we can do that. But in middle school or high school, like belonging, this big revelation for me, this thing that I discovered as I was preparing, I was like, well, I can't start, hey kid, just be you. Actually, we've got to work as a group to create a space where a student would be safe enough to be themselves. And the big learning for me was belonging is this thing that we desperately need, but it's really odd in that it's something we can't provide for ourselves. Like that was this huge, like, wait a second, why would it be like this? Like we need this so badly, and lives are just destroyed and people are lost and do frantic, like desperate things when they don't feel like they belong. But I can't give this to myself. Like the people around me, I think the definition that the American Psychiatric Association gives it is, or my American Psychological Association, I think it's like the feeling of acceptance and approval from an individual, group, or society as a whole. It's like, it's a feeling, it's a reaction to something. We don't get to decide what we feel. It's a response to what is there. And so we need belonging so badly, but other people have to provide it. So I guess full circle, Henry, back to your point is like, I think in acceptance of myself and this acceptance of what it means to be a person and how goofy and messed up we can be, perhaps what you experience or what I hope people experience when they're with me is, yeah, there's nothing that you're going to say or do where I'd be like, all right, yeah, anyways, I'm going to be over here. But people could be real and feel like they belong when they're with me.
And I think it is such a true point. I mean, if I were to tell you guys right now the thing that makes me, in my opinion, the most unlovable, the worst thing I've done, or I were to tell a room of 50 people, chances are 30 people would raise their hand and be like, yeah, me too.
Yeah, dude. No way.
Right.
You too, bro? I thought that was just
Yeah.
me.
So there is, and I love that you allow that thought of, wow, that, yeah, it sounds human, to actually lead to this optimistic unity and not this nihilistic hopelessness that I think it on some other end can lead to, where you're like, wow, I can't believe I'm thinking these thoughts. If other people are thinking these thoughts, this world is messed up. It's like, well, wait a second, maybe there's another way to see that. So I appreciate you shining light on that.
Yeah, you put myself in like the shoes of like a 12 to 16-year-old who's never had that space to ever share those thoughts that make them feel like they're a bad person. And you can see where that spiral starts to get out of control with your inner voice of being like, oh my gosh, I'm this terrible person. Everyone else around me is looking like they're having so much fun, and they're able to like poke fun at each other and all these things. But I get so worked up over these issues because they're speaking to truth, And so, when really everyone in that group or everyone in their social circle is kind of thinking or processing the same things and are trying to navigate their teenage emotions and thoughts. And so I definitely think establishing that space early on for those young people is like so essential, right? Which is why I think the work that Blue Marble does and Ed, what you guys do in schools are so important, because that is the missing element to schools. To answer your question in the beginning of the meeting, Henry, is like there's no space for these kids to like understand that they aren't these demon children. They are normal humans who are experiencing normal emotions.
Mm-hmm. That's good,
And the
man.
range of emotions, they just they're like undergoing so much biological change that it's hard for them to understand, because then they watch a lot of kids who are further than them and they think they need to be like them. So then they start acting older than they actually are, but they forget the youth is pretty much one of the most beautiful things of all time. Ed,
Man,
you
and
skated over something and I really want to come back to it, but there's something um, that you have on all of us here in this space, and I feel like you can really provide us with some wisdom and potentially some listeners with some wisdom. But you're a dad, man. You're a father, and you're an awesome dad. And I think that is, you talk about spaces, right? I think that space does start at your home, and making your kid and your children feel like they can express. Um, so can you just talk a little bit about what that has been like, your journey of being a father, and um, however you want to explain it or talk to it, but
Yeah, man. My oldest daughter is 19 and my youngest daughter is 16. And it's, I mean, wow. When you first have a kid, what you imagine that'll be like, to understanding what it means to have an infant in your house and what it means to have a toddler in every stage along the way. And then, not to mention, I think one of the things that a lot of people don't prepare you for is that caring for an individual, and perhaps this even begins if you ever, decide to have a long-term partner, or you move in with somebody or whatever. I mean, immediately your motivations, your selfishness, these things are just exposed like to the nth degree the moment you begin to share a space, and you have to take other people's feelings and dreams into every consideration, down to what kind of cereal you want to buy. You know what I mean? It's like there's these things where it's concession after concession after concession, and hopefully your partner's doing the same. But then then there's another depth at which you go when kids are born and brought into a relationship. And this, this unity between you and this other individual suddenly is, there's a third life, personality, etc. that's part of that dynamic, and you're responsible for nurturing, caring for this individual. It's crazy, man. There's so many things, but I think this aspect of coming to grips, again, back to what I mentioned earlier, it is a lesson in humility. Like having kids, it's an enormous lesson in humility. You feel like you just when you think you have something figured out, there's a curveball, and you just realize like, oh wow, that was just for that season. Now they're this age, and that no longer applies. And so it's a gift because you can feel like a hero, but then immediately the next moment you can feel like just like I'm horrible. I lost my temper, or I had no idea. Or I had no idea by me saying that or doing that it would make her feel this way. And it's just a lot of self-monitoring. But I think that the biggest learning has been happening for me recently in what it means for my children to become adults and to very much have their own opinions, have their own opinions about me and my choices and my beliefs, and how quickly I can say something. And because we have this life now with them, 19 years of shared experiences, that when I say something, it's not in isolation like it would be perhaps with a stranger or maybe even a new friend. Like that, what I just said is chained to all these other moments and references that suddenly are pulled into that current moment. And I just literally had to call my daughter yesterday, who's away at university, and just apologize to her. Like I was just like, hey, when we were on the phone the other day, you were talking about your roommates, and she's trying to figure out her roommate situation for next year. Because I don't know if you guys remember this. It wasn't that long ago for you. It was a long time ago for me. But they're making decisions. Like they have to decide what they're going to do next fall, like by December 15th, like with their roommate. So it's just this crazy thing. So they've only been living together for like 2 months, these 4 girls. And I just said something and just asked a couple of questions because I'm also like a certified coach. And so I automatically go into leadership or life coaching or just asking some questions to hopefully bring about some awareness in my daughter. And I don't mean to do it. It's just, it happens naturally. And I just said, oh, well, have you thought about blah, 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 blah. And it just was, again, chained to this thing. Like in her mind, it felt like I didn't trust her ability to parse through what the appropriate next step should be. I'm still parenting her. She's 19. And so I could just hear, she didn't say that, but in her response, I could feel a little bit of irritation. I could feel that she felt I'd maybe overstepped. And so I said, I apologized then, but I got off the phone and then I was still thinking about it the next day. So I just called her and just said, hey, I think yesterday when I said that, it may have come off not how I meant it. And so I'm just sorry that I did that, and created some space for her to share what she had felt. And she shared that, in fact, that she thought that I had accidentally stepped into coaching mode, and to her, it felt like I didn't trust her and her insight. And so I was able to apologize. And so again, I think it's this biggest gift, but it's my gosh, man, it's the biggest sandpaper to all of your sharp edges that you could possibly have as far as your character is concerned. Those are just a couple of my gut responses to that question. It's a big question.
That's so good.
Of course, I feel like there could be a whole separate conversation around that. But I feel like you're always, talking so willingly about the work that you're doing. But I feel like a lot of the work as a parent is like foundational to who you are, and plays a huge part of your life and maybe your sense of belonging. So yeah, I want to see you in that way and kind of give you a chance to share on something that I feel like makes a part of your heart whole. So thanks for sharing that, Ed.
Nah, man. Thanks for asking. Thanks for seeing me that way, Fletch.
So before we let Ed go, at the end of your talk, Ed, one of the things you say is the power of affirmation and compliments. Even the idea of going as far to spam compliments, that it often can take 4 to 8. I've heard anything in between, positive things to kind of outweigh or balance out one negative. So before we let Ed sneak out here as the one who's always encouraging people to affirm others, I thought it'd just be appropriate if we each go and just spam some compliments for Ed. And because as you guys can tell, he's someone who you don't just have a 45-minute conversation with. You really sit down for 3 hours. So we're really cutting it down here, but hopefully we'll have Ed back.
I'd love to. Yeah,
Ed seems like a saga guy. You know, he seems like a multi. He's an episodic guy. He's watched all the Star Wars. He's watched all the Harry Potters.
Dude, episodic. I've never been referred to as episodic. I'll carry that with me for a long time. That was an important word you just spoke over me, Fletch. I will carry.
That's
Proudly.
good. That's good.
Well,
All right,
I
McKenzie,
think
you want to
that
start
kicks
off?
off my
Just
spamming.
something you appreciate about Ed, McKenzie.
Oh gosh. Well, I haven't had that much interaction besides the pod, but what I will say is I think there's a lot of people who reach 40, 50, and 60 and start letting that lead their life in a way of feeling like they can't have conversations like this. They can't feel or act youthful. They can't do certain things because it's below them because they've reached a certain age. And I think Ed just kind of like blows all of that right out of the realm of possibility. Like the fact that 3 20-year-olds can relate and have honest discussion with someone who's in the generation before us, I think is not something that happens every day. So I definitely think that is a massive asset and not a negative thing for sure.
Thanks,
And
man.
just for clarity's sake, late 20s. But
yeah, I'm not 21.
Nice.
No, man. Thanks, McKenzie. I appreciate that. I'm learning. Henry is actually teaching me a great deal about sitting in praise and compliments and just accepting that. And so, because that's what I want people to do when I praise them. So I'm trying to do that, Henry.
McKenzie, you took mine again, but so I'm having to go in the file cabinet, the Ed file cabinet. Ed, I think you do a fabulous job of embarking down the journey of humility. And every time I talk to you, I'm so amazed because even though you've lived so much longer, like your amount of time that you've taught is like how long we all have been alive. And sometimes you like to undermine your own experience and you downplay your own life and what you've done and accomplished and the hearts you've changed. But just the humility you bring into conversations always strikes me and inspires me more than you know.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. I learned so much from you guys. Anytime I spend time with you, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so good. I learn a great deal. So for what it's worth, thank you for inviting an old guy into a conversation and feeling like I had something worth sharing that the three of you perhaps or listeners could benefit from. So that's all.
You have a lot worth sharing, man. And I know I'm super grateful that I get to spend as much time as I do with you. Sometimes it's a surreal thing to realize like I get to work with you and learn from you. One thing I really have valued and one reason that it's really easy for me to come under your leadership and your trust and to trust that is, man, there's just so many hurdles. Like the way of life is wide, but the path is narrow, right? Or the road is wide, but the way of life is narrow. And to me, you are someone that has their priorities in line. And not, obviously it probably doesn't feel perfect, but better than in a way that I really look up to. You don't, from what I see, fall into the traps of the things the world tries to tell us is the supreme good. And you're able to stay aligned to what really is the supreme good, and to honor God, to love your family, and then to allow that love to overflow into a career that fills you up and is connected to your purpose. That's a rare thing to see, and it's something that I look up to, and I'm like, yeah, I want that. I want to feel in alignment in that way. And I really appreciate you for that.
Thanks, man. I'm really thankful for the time we get to spend together too. For the record, like whenever Henry and I get our one-on-ones, man, it's usually, I don't know, we're like, okay, let's do 2 hours and 3 hours. He's like, man, I really got to go. I'm like, yeah, me too. It just always goes really, really long, but it never feels long, at least to me. I hope it doesn't feel long.
No, it doesn't.
But,
especially when we get on a bike.
Yes. Yeah, that was helpful.
Ed, it's always funny when I was living with Henry. He'd be like an hour late to something we were planning. And I was like, where the heck is he? He's in the driveway in the car as it's still running, talking to somebody about something. Yeah. And it's just prolonged beyond what he was anticipating on a short car ride. So it's always funny to see that come up.
I've gotten better at turning the
Professional
car off.
time dissolver.
Yes. Well, that man put me in that field as well, because I feel like that's me all the time. Yeah, I get that.
Please
I
teach
get
me
that.
how to do it.
The Davis stall.
I think, man, like to a point that you made, just as kind of we're wrapping up, and like last thought here is something you just said that you said you appreciate in me. I think anything that you've heard from me is, either my experience or something that I've heard or learned from someone else. This isn't certainly like, my own wisdom. It's just this accumulation of things that I've decided to hold on to. But one of the things that you mentioned, Henry, about priorities is one of the most profound things I think I can remember someone talking about, is that just about everything we do, and particularly, as men, and we want to achieve, we want to look to our left and right and see that we're tracking with everybody else, that we're like on level with our peers and with the people around us, that by a certain age we've achieved what we want to achieve, and using that as our metric. But someone said that just about everything that we do, someone else will one day do. It's like, it's not that we are irreplaceable. However, there are just a couple of things in life that we alone will do. Like it's something that will just be very specific to us. Like, we will be that spouse for that season, or that partner for that season in this person's life. We will be the parent of that child, and only, that no one else will be the parent, the actual, the parent of that child. And that if you can narrow down what are the things that, once I'm gone, no one else will actually be able to do. It starts, I don't know, it starts becoming a little bit clearer of the things perhaps, or where we should bend our time, our heart, our thoughts, our resources. And it's very rewarding work, and it may cost you in other places, but perhaps where it costs you is a price that's, worth paying for what you might benefit from by investing well in those other spaces.
So good, man. And even in it, I just hear consistently it's relationships, right? Like,
yes,
we'll never get this time, right? The four of us on this podcast on this day, right? And so just super grateful to be in this moment in time with you guys.
Yeah, same. Thanks for the invitation. So good.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your time. Final thought, Flea?
Episodic. It's coming. Part 2.
See you guys.
Happening.
Thanks so much for listening, guys. I hope that was valuable and insightful. And before you go, do whatever you got to do today, I want to share something with you that I'm really excited about. On January 21st to 26th, we are hosting Peaceful Warrior, a men's wellness retreat to El Salvador. This is going to be an amazing group immersive experience, digging into a lot of these topics on what it means to be a man and a healthy man in the world today, a whole person. We're going to be moving, we're going to be eating well, we're going to be sharing a lot of meaningful experiences together. There's so much more to say about it, but go do your own research. You can find more at yournextretreat.com. Can't wait to see you guys there, and have a beautiful day. Peace and love.